those of you who have read the title and can see what I'm holding right here, today is going to be about African fat-tailed gecko care. African fat-tailed geckos are extremely similar to leopard geckos, especially in their care and just the way that they look. Some people find it hard to tell them apart, and especially I did in the beginning, because I really thought that they were pretty much the same thing, especially with all the different morphs. I was confused what's a leopard gecko and what's an African fat-tailed gecko, but it's actually very easy to tell these guys apart. African fat-tailed geckos, as you can see, have just solid black eyes, and leopard geckos do not have that whatsoever. They also have different coloring, and they both have a ton of different morphs and colors within the African fat tails and the leopard geckos that are just completely separate from one another. The African fat tails do require a little bit higher of a humidity, but other than that, the care is pretty much spot on the same. One other difference with the African fat tails is that they do stay a little bit smaller than leopard geckos, so that's kind of nice, and they're just really easy to take care of. So we're going to get into the care for these guys. So when it comes to housing an African fat-tailed gecko, it's recommended to use a 10-gallon enclosure. As I said earlier, they do not really get that large. She's full grown, and this is her right here, so they are not really large geckos. I think the males get a little bit larger than the females, and they can max out at about 9 inches, including tail. So when keeping an African fat-tailed gecko, something that's really nice about these geckos is that they do not require any UVB whatsoever. You do want to make sure that they have heat though, and it's best to use heat pads for these guys because they need that belly heat and it works out best for them. So you do want that hot spot on one side of the enclosure, and I usually put a hide on top of that, so that is the hot hide. And you do want that hot spot to reach 90 degrees. On the other side of the enclosure, because they do require a high humidity, it's important to always have a humid hide for them. And I will show you how I made mine, but it really helps with their sheds, and it's very, very important for the African fat tails because they do require that higher level of humidity. You also want to offer them a water bowl. You do want to use ReptiSafe. You want to make sure that there's no chlorine in the water whatsoever for them, and then that's pretty much it. And again, I also mist my enclosure down every single night before I go to bed because they are nocturnal and that's when they come out. So I like to make it a little extra moist in there just to raise that humidity level when she wakes up. And again, just like leopard geckos, the diet is pretty much the same exact thing. They are insectivores, so they love their insects. You do want to make sure that you're gut loading the insects just to make it more nutritious for your animal. Mango is on my back right now. Okay, are you gonna make an appearance over here? There you are, say hi. Anyway, back to diet. So they are insectivores, they're going to be eating insects. You want to gut load. Another very important thing, because they do not require the UVB, you do want to dust your insects with calcium D3. And you also want to give them a multivitamin at least twice a month. Some insects that are really great for the African fat tails include superworms, dubia roaches, hornworms, silkworms, crickets. Again, just make sure you're gut loading everything and dusting it with that calcium D3 that they desperately need. When it comes to substrate for African fat-tailed geckos, there are many different things that you can do. I personally use paper towel just because I find it easiest to clean and I just like the way it looks. I temporarily tried Eco Earth just because that's what I use for my other enclosures that require a high humidity level. And I personally just didn't like how it was working. I find it's just easier to use that humid hide rather than just have the Eco Earth everywhere. There's many different things that you can do. It is very important to avoid sand because that will cause impaction within your African fat-tailed gecko. So just keep that in mind when getting one. Another thing about African fat-tailed geckos is that they do live 15 to 20 years, so that's a very long commitment. So just make sure that you're willing to take on that animal for its entire lifespan before getting one. And then that's pretty much everything. African fat tails are so easy to take care of. They're kind of not as common as leopard geckos, obviously, because you can find them anywhere, but they're becoming more available. I would check out reptile shows if you're interested in getting one, and hopefully they'll be more popular in the future because they're just amazing and I think they deserve way more credit than they have. So I'll go ahead and show you Mango's enclosure, and I hope that this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. This is Mango's enclosure right now. I believe this is a 5-gallon, so I'm gonna have to bump her up. She is on top of her hot hide right now, so her heating pad is under here. This is her water bowl, and then this is her humid hide over here that I just made out of Tupperware. And then I sprayed paper towels and then put some moss in there, and that keeps it nice and humid so she can climb in and out whenever she wants.